Okay, folks, welcome to another edition of Ragged Theology podcast. I'm delighted to be invited to welcome two friends of mine today, Kat Osborne, who's Chief Executive of Safe Families, and Alasdair Bennett, who's Chief Executive of Bethany Christian Trust. So welcome both of you.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Andy.
Thank you.
So I worked with you, Alasdair, for 11 years, and I've been working with Kat for the last 4 or 5 years. But for those of you who don't know you, maybe if you could just introduce yourself, say a bit about your background, where you're from, and your current position. So maybe Kat, if you could go first.
Sure, yeah. So I currently live in Nottingham, but I grew up in Birmingham as an only child, although my family fostered through a lot of my younger years, which I think really shaped a lot about how I see home and hospitality, and probably embedded in me an unknown passion for safe families at that point. And I have been working with Safe Families for the last 5 years and have been chief exec for the last 2.5.
Cool. And Alasdair, you're from some obscure island, is that right?
Well, my mother is from Harris, and sometimes I carry that badge and say I'm from the Western Isles. But we actually grew up in Edinburgh, but my folks live up in Harris, so we go and visit when we can. Obviously, less so just now. Born and brought up in Edinburgh, married to Katie, have a daughter called Ailey who's 14, and we live in town. And I started working in Bethany in 1997 as a project worker, so I can tell you more about that in due course. But that's the background. I'm chief exec at Bethany since August 18, which sometimes feels a long time ago and sometimes feels like just yesterday.
You must have a gold watch for length of service, do you?
Getting there. John Rogers is ahead of me. I'm probably now 24 years coming on by the end of this year. So, but yeah.
Good. So we're wanting to chat about leadership today. So maybe if you could tell us both about your respective organisations, tell us a little bit about the kind of vision of the organisations and the journey that they've been on over the last few years. Obviously, Safe Families is a slightly newer organisation, but maybe Kat, if you go first, just about what Safe Families is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. In a nutshell, Safe Families is about putting volunteers around struggling families who play the role of a good friend, neighbour, aunt, grandparent, where those roles are missing, so that their family are able to thrive and stay together in a family unit that is connected into community, and that they know they're loved. I think it's that power of people around them who are there just because they care about them, not because they're paid to be around them, who enable that parent or that child to know that they are worthy of love, and therefore begin to have confidence in themselves, and because of that are able to turn their situation around. And I guess as an organisation, so as Andy said, we're pretty young. We've been around coming up to 8 years, and in the early days very much started with a vision to reduce the flow of children into care and see the church really having an impact in reducing the number of children in our care system, having recognised the way that having been in care can impact the life chances of children coming out the other side of care. And we are still deeply passionate about reducing the flow of children into care. But I think I've recognised over those 8 years 2 really key themes in the families that we're working with, and one of those being isolation. So I've probably in the last 2 or 3 years reframed our focus from reducing the flow of children into care to wanting no one to feel alone, and that belief that as we build community around family and people recognise that they aren't alone and there are people who care about them, that is what's going to change the flow of children into care, and many other kind of things in our society as well that we want to change. So it's probably been that journey of digging into our why a bit deeper, and then reframing that vision, and our values that underpin that make kind of Safe Families unique from any other befriending or mentoring service, I think.
And what's the size of Safe Families? I should know these statistics, but how many staff?
Sure. So we're working across 39 local authorities. We have coming up just under 5,000 volunteers. That will be one of our milestones that we hope to hit this year, which is super exciting. I've worked with over 11,000 children and have 120-ish staff around the country.
Great.
Tremendous.
And you were saying before the call that Scotland is the best team, is that right?
Oh, without a doubt, the best team, yeah. Plus my favourite place to holiday, so.
Ali, Bethany's been going for a wee bit longer.
Yeah, so Alan and Anne Berry, with a couple of friends, started Bethany Christian Trust in 1983, just along the road from where I am just now in Castlebank Street. And yeah, from then initially it was a hostel, a shared hostel for men and women who had a range of needs, and then over the years it's developed. Now our mission is the same as exactly as what was written then. So our mission, the kind of heartbeat behind everything, is to relieve suffering for specifically for vulnerable and homeless people, and to meet long-term needs. So it's the kind of dual nature of relieving suffering in a crisis or in the moment of where somebody has particular presenting needs, but looking beyond that moment and thinking about the longer term for that person, whether it's housing, access to training, education, all the different sort of potential and realizing potential that we can support people in. So I've worked in Bethany since '97. I've worked in various parts of the charity. Started in Bethany Christian Centre, which is where it originated, and worked as a project worker there, supporting men in recovery from addictions, but who also had a homelessness background. The main sort of emphases that we kind of frame our work under now, well, certainly for the last 3 years, have been, we're effectively saying, like, all of our services, they're very broad and they cover a whole sort of range of needs, in terms of age range, in terms of presenting need, whether it's mental health presentation, a young person that's struggling, somebody that's evicted, somebody who's rough sleeping, somebody who needs support around access to housing, or needs a home, needs some time and shared accommodation, or some support around education or training. The whole gamut is so huge. So what we did was we put it under a framework and emphasised 3 main kind of tranches of what we do. So the first is homelessness prevention. So a third of what we're doing, which is the area that you worked in, Andy, when you were in Bethany, the kind of community support development side of the work. Still calling it community support and development, but all of the different components, such as the prison support, young persons befriending, the access to training and education, and the befriending services that come under the banner of homelessness prevention. So everything that can try and ultimately put the brakes on somebody entering into further crisis. There's recovery work in there as well, and family work. The second aspect is crisis intervention. So all the services that are geared around responding to somebody in a particular moment of crisis. So the care vans that go out in Edinburgh and Glasgow, the currently called the Welcome Centre, used to be the care shelter that is responding to crisis of rough sleeping for individuals. Some of the specialised accommodation units come under that as well, and furniture initiatives. And then the third emphasis is what we call housing and support. So any kind of provision where the person has a tenancy and we're supporting that person to sustain that tenancy. Some of them are Bethany tenancies, some of them are council or housing association tenancies, but we're providing the support to people. So those are the 3 emphases, and for me they're kind of like, from the point of view of a strategy, they are, thinking about the last 2 or 3 years, they're all areas that we need more of in Scotland, and in the UK generally, actually. We need more homelessness prevention work. We need all the different aspects of that and the range of different prevention that can go on. We need more housing with support. There's a shortage of social housing and the support to go with it. But one of the things Bethany will still emphasise is that we do, whilst there's still the level of presenting crisis, we also need crisis intervention. So the last 3 years we've been just seeking God together to know what He leads us to develop, and part of that is part of what we believe we should be doing is developing one new service in each of those 3 areas each year for the current 5 years. So I can tell you a bit more about that. But it's been exciting to pioneer new things, but also thinking about sustaining what we're also called to do as well at the same time.
Good. So it's exciting, both of you have been in the organisation and now you're both chief exec, which is interesting. You've both developed in the organisation and worked your way into leadership. I'm very interested in the whole area of leadership. So as you guys think back over your leadership journey, which may go right back, into childhood, I suppose, who, as you look back, do you think inspired you to be a leader, or who helped you, who mentored you, as you think back, who helped you in your leadership journey? Kat?
So yeah, when I was thinking about this, I think there's a couple of people or moments that stand out to me. My first ever boss, so I worked overseas in humanitarian aid for about 5 years. And my first boss, when I arrived in Madagascar, so at this point I'm a pretty naive 21-year-old, having wanted to work overseas in kind of humanitarian aid for as long as I could remember, finally made it onto the ground, a little bit homesick. I remember him saying to me, as long as you can tell me why you make any decision you make, I will have your back. And being like, oh, okay. So I was off in the middle of nowhere, building these gravity water systems with my manual out here, really nervous about each decision I'd make or the pipes that I'd ordered, but it really stuck in my head. I was like, okay, as long as I've got a reason for each decision I make, he'll have my back. And he totally meant it. I got decisions wrong and he had my back. And that has fundamentally stuck with me, I think, as a style of leadership that is, I think I would say I've got quite an empowering style. I want people to crack on, make decisions, kind of run with whatever they have, and that they know that as long as they are thinking through what they're doing, I'll have their back even if it's wrong. So that was one key thing for me. I think I grew up in a context, and I think this is a mixture of, my parents both politically voted very differently. I went to Greenbelt as a teenager, which I think modeled something about sharing a value system but disagreeing. So I think through my kind of childhood and teens, something was modeled to me about the ability to disagree well, and that being okay and safe in safe spaces, that was okay. So again, I think that's something that has really led into a value that I've subconsciously held on to, that it's fine to disagree, and we can do that well with each other. And I think, yeah, probably those are two themes that as I look back on what's influenced how I lead, that I would definitely reflect on.
Cool. And yourself, Alasdair?
Yeah, I'll pick out a couple of folk from the past, and then from the present, probably just emphasise more broadly. I've got the privilege of catching up with Alan Berry periodically for lunch, and I've known Alan since even before starting at Bethany. I remember him preaching at a local church down in New Haven, where I'd been going as a young Christian, and just being struck by the passion that he had, the call, the challenge that he made to the local congregation, the reaction in the local congregation, where someone that's challenging and speaking challenge to the church, sometimes that isn't always met well, but just the way that he rallied the body of Christ in Scotland across every denomination, to say this is a cause, this is a purpose that we need to get behind, and built the whole church support that we have now for Bethany, which is a heritage, a legacy that we now participate in, in the role that I have and in those that my colleagues have. His humility, his kind of can-do mindset, his get up and go, and also Anne Berry, his wife, and they won't like me saying this stuff, but they're just so gentle. The fruit of the Spirit is evident in their hearts and lives and overflows. Another person from the past that was my boss for a number of years was Gordon Weir, and I think the thing that I most admired and found contagious in him was just his outward passion for Jesus, and he wore it on his sleeve. It didn't matter what anyone thought, And I find that so refreshing. And it wouldn't be dressed up in language such as, somebody might say recovery work, one of the routes to recovery is the Christian philosophy model, and it's packaging it in a certain way. It would be, if you really want to be free, you need to come into a saving relationship with Jesus Christ. With that kind of level of just this sharing of the gospel, owning it. And he spoke to myself and a colleague back in the day, said always carry the torch of the gospel. If there's one thing I can impress upon, that's always carry the torch of the gospel, because without that central unconditional love at the heart of it all, what are we doing? So those were the two things. And then in the current day, I find inspiration, Andy, from the people around me, like at all levels, leadership of the night worker at the Welcome Centre, the night shift guy at Bethany House, the women that are working in Ann Hope House, and the managers, some of whom in Bethany, and just the service and the heart that they show. So I just find great inspiration from that. And also my wife, Katie, she won't let me sing with you, but she led me in the beginning when she'd been a Christian since she was about 12. When I came to faith, I went to university, met her at uni there, and she was leading a Christian discipleship course, and she passed on the baton to me. This was before we were in any sort of romantic involvement, but I just remember being struck by the way that she led, and was attracted to the gentleness and the sort of leadership. And there's one thing, a takeaway perhaps for folks that I would emphasize in leadership is you can only be yourself. And that's been something that I've seen in all these people, just to be yourself.
And Kat, just thinking back to some of the leaders that inspired you, what would you say are some of the traits of those leaders?
I think honesty. So I think that I guess similar to what Alasdair is saying, actually, it comes from that ability to be yourself, doesn't it? And out of that, you're able to be vulnerable, you're able to be real, you show up to conversations in a real way. Definitely vulnerability for me in that is one of those key themes. I think that's really important to enable the safe space that I was talking about, to create a space where people can be honest and bring their full selves. And probably bravery, that willingness to then to step out, to take risks, to risk failure, to talk simply. Again, picking up on some of what Alasdair is saying, we don't need to overcomplicate things. I think for us at Safe Families, I've always, I think probably a little bit differently to Bethany, like we have a very simple model. It's love the one in front of you really, really abundantly well. And we've seen growth as a result of that, but it's not complicated. It's a really simple model, but to just stick focused on that, and be brave to talk in the language of love to local authorities who don't use that, or to hold to our belief that actually the church is called into this in a local authority context where they might balk at that at times. So yeah, I think bravery would be another one.
Yeah.
I think leaders bring coherence to something, don't they? Both of you have explained your organisations very, very well, very profoundly, but they're also quite complex organisations, But you've simplified the vision very, very clearly, which is what great leaders do.
I find it really interesting that what you mentioned there, Kat, about the one in front of you, because that was one of the kind of mantras around homelessness that Bethany sort of navigates and is part of, is ending homelessness. It's the same as the kind of end poverty campaign, and obviously everyone wants to see that, and we're part of that, and it's in one of our it's in our vision statement, ending homelessness in Scotland. But we very deliberately have, as the extension of that statement, one person at a time. So it's about that one person, because of course we want to see the bigger vision with all of our partners about ending homelessness and reducing all the social inequality and all the rest of it, but we're also grounded, and we can only meet the need of the people that are in front of us at any one time, but to make that our focus rather than so there's the greatness of one vision kind of, but connected down on the ground with the person, the family, the community in front of you, which is really interesting that interplays for the two charities in such a close way, actually.
Yeah, although probably given the kind of, I guess, faith nature of both charities, and that, like, Jesus leaving the 99 to go after the one.
Yes.
It's inherent in us as well, isn't it? It's like the most natural thing in the world, as well as at times quite unique. And
so just kind of drilling down a wee bit into the kind of what leadership is, or what good leadership is. When I was at Bethany, I became a group head. What a wonderful name, a group head. And I'd always been a manager before that, and I thought I'd got on quite well as a manager most of the time, I think. But suddenly I was responsible for several services, and I was floundering a little bit, and we were offered a mentor, weren't we, Alasdair?
That's right, yeah.
And it was somebody called David Vardy who mentored me, and he mentored me. We only met, I think, about 5 times, but it had a very sort of profound effect on my leadership journey. And all these things that you guys are saying about, great leaders, humility, generosity, tremendous wisdom, boldness, not frightened to challenge me about things I was hesitant about, and so I suppose my question really is just, what is leadership? Which I think is just such a important question, because when I look back to my 11 years in social work or local authority work, I was frequently frustrated, and as I look back now, I realise I was frustrated because of lack of leadership. There's lots of managerialism and kind of systems, but there was no real leadership. So I suppose my question to both of you is, what does great leadership look like, and how would you explain it to the young Andy Murray that was the new group head? If I came to you and asked you, what would you say to somebody who's an emerging leader in your organisation? Nice, easy question.
I'm going to lead by letting you go first on this one.
Leaders go last. Yes. What a question. So the things that I have picked up that I value, that I would aim at, would be a whole combination. These are not in order. So I think fundamentally, it's, for me, it has to be from a place of humility. So Jesus said, brought the child into the midst and said, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And it was he couldn't be greater than the servant. So there's something about humility. We all know that can be false, because as soon as you think you've got humility, you're in trouble. So what does it mean to consider others greater than yourselves? What does it mean to support preferring others? So something really strong around humility, and with that, just being yourself. Like, leadership has, certainly in terms of position, you get a jacket. So you get the chief executive jacket, not literally, but you get that clothing to wear, and people don't necessarily like that clothing. And I think the best thing to do is just to be yourself in it, and let that sort of grow into the sense of the mantle fitting. So whether it was a group head, a new manager, anyone, just to be like, we don't have to grasp at the authority, if that makes sense. So not have to like, I'm chief exec now, I must now sort of sit up more straight, and I must project a greater authority to those around me. No, that's a God-given thing, that it's okay to be in the role and be yourself. And I would say a leader needs to see ahead, and have a sense of direction, but also be able to go ahead and say, this is the way, come on, this is the way, I can see the way, share it, consult, engage with all the different people that are interested to know which way we're going in, value as much as possible all the different views and contributions, but ultimately still be saying, this is the way, and then going that direction, because there's a you're ultimately seeking to lead people into something. We're also under authority, so we've got trustees. So you want to, I would say, part of that leading is also being a follower. It's one of those cliches, but ultimately it's true that we need to be good followers. And I quite often say to people that what's been impressed in my heart is my first job is to keep myself, as far as I am able, depending on the Spirit of God, submitted to the Lordship of Jesus Christ, and then within that to seek to keep Bethany submitted to that Lordship. So it starts with like me being submitted to the Lord as you know, as far as one can be, which is obviously a journey for all of us. I think love, where love is expressed in leadership, it's so powerful because it tends to be the opposite of what the world would display. The world might display appetite or growth or greed or sort of strength in numbers or in whatever, but love expressed in leadership, I find that inspiring, and you can find it in all sorts of places. So love and service, I mean, our values that we kind of, to sort of summarize it for us, are for love to be our baseline, like for love to be our standard. It's a high thing to claim, and we're super careful. I'm super careful to say it's a direction rather than a destination that we've arrived at. To serve others, again, as soon as you say or claim that you're a servant leader, you're in trouble, because you shouldn't be saying that about yourself. It should be witnessed. And so, but we do seek to serve. And then I think something around honouring people and valuing people, and that's not straightforward, because everyone has different experiences of that in life and what it means to be valued and honoured. But as much as possible to seek to honour and value people around us, I think would be a big thing as well. So there's a bit of a hodgepodge for me.
I think one of the things you always used to say to me, Alasdair, was, I remember this when we used to get, when there was a very occasional dispute or disagreement about something within the organisation, you always used to talk about grace upon grace.
Yeah.
And that's a thing I've always taken with me from Bethany is,
Yeah.
you know, if there's a disagreement, you know, show grace upon grace. And I quite often say that to my guys.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, Kat, on you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that I still hear as like, oh, am I a leader? Like, there's still, I've got to be honest, with that like voice of doubt that's like, oh, like, do I even have the right to speak into this as a topic? But I also know, for me, particularly when I stepped into Safe Families, at that point as a programme director, not as chief exec, having come from having been chief exec of a much smaller charity, I found myself around our senior leadership table in a place where I just, in me, knew that I had views on what we did, and I guess almost what you were saying before, Andy, clarity around this is why Safe Families exists. That was a culmination of like so many aspects of my life and my calling and my faith and my childhood. So I think, again, it aligns with that stuff around being who you are. Like, this leadership position has come out of a culmination of experiences and story, like my individual story, the stories that I've kind of bumped alongside of other people, into a position where I have a kind of clarity and a vision for what, as Safe Families, we need to be calling the church into to serve families in our community. That when you're sitting in that place, it also feels like the most natural position in the world. Which is really releasing and really freeing. So there's something for me in calling and just being obedient. As you're obedient to where God is calling you into,
yeah,
you will find yourself with the skills and the giftings to live out that place as a leader. I think that as a result of that gives a vision and a clarity of purpose that you're not creating. It's just kind of in you, and it's about having the skills to articulate that, but it's pulling out of you something that is in you. And then the values piece, and I think for any organization, being able to define, these are our core values, these are the things that we would hurt for, these are the things that we choose to celebrate. When you define those for an organization and they're clear, it gives everybody a framework to make decisions in. So I think for us, as we hit COVID, actually there were decisions you had to make at rapid speed that you could make in moments because you had that framework of values to dig into. So when it came to like, do we give away our training? Yes, because we've said humility is a humility, and within that, robust honouring partnerships where we give away is who we are. So it didn't need to be a long deliberation because we had a framework of values that we all were bought into to make that decision in. And I think looking at those values as a like, am I as an individual in the organisation stepping into them, digging into them, being prepared to be punished for them? Internally, do we reflect them? And then externally, do we reflect them? I feel like those are things that as a leader of an organisation, we have a responsibility to lead on.
Wonderful.
I was on a course recently where somebody said, I used to think of leadership like as being an engineer. So you're at a production line and you were trying to create a product, whatever it might be, you had a vision for something. But he said increasingly I now see leadership as a farmer, where you're creating the right conditions for people to grow and prosper. And I think that's a much more helpful paradigm to see leadership in, and I hold leadership very lightly. So I don't see myself as a leader for the next 40 years. I just, like Kat says, it's a calling, and, my next calling might be something else, whereas I think some people see leadership as this onward and upwards journey to a sort of, prime minister or something, and it might be that the Lord calls us to different things along the journey.
Although interesting you say that, Anne, because that could be a good shout for you.
We'll not get into politics too much. So one of the things that's very closely aligned to good leadership, I think, is how to create a healthy workplace culture. And obviously I've experienced culture in Bethany and culture in Safe Families. And, I think it'd be safe to say in both organisations there's been a journey with regard to culture. Do you want to just speak a wee bit about how you guys have gone about creating a healthy culture in your organisations, and how you've tried to model and lead that? Maybe Kat, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I think it really springs off a lot of the stuff that I was just saying. So it's been about leading by example. And I guess for me, because Safe Families is so embedded in who I am, it's not been like, oh, I should volunteer, so that I'm modeling that this is part of my life as well as trying to lead it. It would be weird to me not to also be volunteering. So there's that level of integrity that you're living out what it is you're calling people towards. You're living out the values that you're saying that as an organization you're prioritizing, and you're loving people. Like, if one of our values is living abundantly, that's not just living abundantly the families that we're serving. It's looking at our policies. Do our policies internally love our staff? Like, is this a place they feel listened to and heard? Because those are things that love would do. So yeah, I think it is the stepping into all of those things that we've just talked about, really. Yeah.
I really like the idea of friendship leadership. It was the way that I managed Bethany Christian Centre, which is a recovery centre for men in Leith, and still going, and led now by one of the guys that was there years ago himself. And friends, like, I suppose it's echoed from the words that Jesus said, I no longer call you servants, but I call you friends. And this sense of being brought into closeness with the person that's leading. So now sometimes you can get fingers burnt with that, especially if something comes up and you've got to sort of challenge a conversation, that kind of thing. But I suppose it was just something that I really found worked in the centre for I was their manager for about 13 years. And so for me, I seek to, like, it's not, I said before, it's not like you get there and you arrive. It always culture needs shored up all the time, consistently. It can always be, it is in one respect always under threat, because human nature is to tend away from the values of love and joy and peace and all the, so, but the direction of travel for me is to seek to genuinely be a friend to the senior team around me. There's myself and 5 directors, to genuinely seek to be their friend. I think we would consider ourselves friends, and they would see that about each other. And then the same for the management team, and then the same within each team. So a sense of family, I think, is something that I would see as something that Alan and Anne Berry really pioneered. And at times, again, that has to be shored up. What does it mean to be family? Like Kat mentioned there, like, the openness of conversation sometimes that a family member could have that might be quite, go with this one, but actually it's okay because we're family. So I would say it's a difficult one, Andy, because I certainly wouldn't want any listener to think, oh, they're saying they've arrived, but it's in terms of direction of travel. For me, I think we're growing, seek to be part of that growth is to acknowledge that we're not there and to keep on kind of pushing ahead into what does it mean for love to be the standard. Like, that's a high claim. Self-reflection, I think, honest self-reflection within teams. I was sharing with the senior team recently a verse like, be devoted to one another. And that's a strong word. Be devoted to one another, and honor yourselves above honor others above yourself. Devotion's a word you would use for like family relationship or for in a religious setting, but this is like saying to us as believers to be devoted to each other. And that, I think, the closer that, for me, unity is probably the number one driver. This tree, talking about the farmer's parallel, this tree is a picture for me of sort of some of the emphasis with that's above the ground, and that's some of the reflection of some of the work that Bethany does and the fruit and seeking to partner and seeking to grow and reach people. But the roots are as important, and the roots need to keep growing, keep building, not to assume just because it says Christian in the name that's going to be we have to drive that, we have to sow that, tend that, grow that. So again, a whole lot of stuff shared, less than I'd like to say, but I just think, prayer as well, to have can't do this ourselves. The fruit of the Spirit's called that for a reason. And so to be building prayer, to be seeking to generate prayer life and opportunity within our charities for prayer to be part of the regular day-to-day.
Yeah. One little anecdote that I thought of then, actually, as you were talking about family, and one of the first things I did when I became chief exec was that, so when we have our senior leadership team meetings, rather than having them at the office, I brought them to my house, like around my kitchen table. I'd feed everybody over the 2 days, sleep everybody at my friends' houses in the community, because there was a sense of, well, if it's good enough for the families we support, it's definitely good enough for us. And that it was in some ways a really small change, but it was a really important one for me to do in terms of both expressing my values, my ability to serve them in terms of food, which is how I love people as an individual. Like, that's something that hospitality is a real passion for me. And then also making sure we took time in those meetings. So each time we met, like, one person would share their kind of story and testimony, and actually prioritizing in our potentially business time, hearing each other, knowing each other's story, understanding what made people tick as individuals, not just as colleagues.
Absolutely. That's brilliant. That's something that we've been just echoes, like especially the sharing. Like, we've got a business agenda, but built into it is sharing. Like, and we down tools and share and talk and are open.
And I definitely, at times, there'd be pushback of like, oh, should we not get to the business quicker? Like, is this really what we should be doing? And you're like, no, it really is. Like, this is what will make us effective.
You'd love it, Ali. There's lots of meat, lots of lamb.
I would do, yes. I'm not a huge fan of the language of love books, but food would be one of mine if it was.
Great. So we're running out of time a wee bit, but can you just tell us a wee bit about how both your own leadership style has the challenge of lockdown and how your organisations have had to adapt. But I'm more interested in really, leadership in lockdown. I mean, how challenging has it been for you? What have you learnt about yourself in lockdown? How have you had to change your leadership style?
Yeah, so for me, this time last year, I was in New Zealand and literally landed back on the 16th of March, where in England at least was when they announced social distancing. So I had no sleep for 36 hours straight into a senior leadership team meeting to discuss our response. And remember at that point, a really almost physical reaction to this new term, social distancing. Like, as a charity that is all about relationship and connection, like, I was angry at the word, I hated it, I was like, no. And then navigating that journey of, okay, so how as a charity that is all about relationship and connection, do we do this in a context of lockdown, social distancing, etc., etc. And so I think it has been I guess key words that come to mind as to what has been essential of being adaptable, being flexible, being willing right at the beginning to be like, okay, well, we had our strategy, let's throw that out the window. What are the problems now and what are we going to do about them? And that ability to be agile and constantly change, wasn't it? Like, you just set out some guidelines for tier 2, and then when we're in tier 3, and then we're in national lockdown, and now we've not got tiers again, and like it constantly having that. And actually, I remember being asked about 6 months in, what has been one of the key things that you think has enabled, say, families to be where you are now? And actually, it sounds really silly, but for me, our IT guy has been one of the absolute essentials. So, because our systems have been able to keep pace with the change, and it sounds so silly, but as a learning point for me, I think that agility of your system to keep pace with the way you have to change has been genuinely life-saving for us as an organization. And then I guess personally, it's been having the spaces where you can, I think we're all just closer to our edges of resilience, aren't we? Like, I am grumpy and angry quicker than in a normal time. And so having the people that you can, I got home yesterday and my housemates were in the lounge and were like, how are you? I'm like, I'm angry. I've been angry all day. I don't have a good reason for being angry, but I'm angry. And recognizing that, acknowledging the fact that all our usual coping mechanisms, we've not, so many stuff. For me, it would be having people around my kitchen table. I haven't been able to do that for 12 months. Yeah. Having grace with ourselves that the reality of not having our normal coping mechanisms means that we are grumpy, angry, etc., on the edge of our resilience more and more. And just being able to talk about that, I think, has been really important. And therefore creating that space for your staff as well. So, we've put out comms about, prioritize your well-being, go for walks at lunchtime, be more flexible with your time. So the things that we're recognizing we're needing, trying to just give permission and create space for that, and then lead by example in that. Like, make sure I'm not just saying go for a walk at lunchtime, but I'm working 10-hour days and never leaving the house.
Yeah, it all resonates very much. In March, there was an expression that kind of rolling around my mind March last year, which was, if ever there was a time people needed us, it was now. And it became part of a letter that we gave to supporters and to the public, that I was very relieved to know that Scottish Government was considering that any kind of homelessness outreach support work was considered essential, and the workers that fulfilled it were considered key workers. That meant that we could sustain all of our operations with adaptation. So it was keeping your eye on lots of different things at once. So there's a whole lot of health and safety legislation to fulfill, which wasn't even written, so you had to write it yourself to start with. Keeping an eye on the well-being of all the different teams, well-being of people that we're supporting in different contexts. The step up in terms of work volume was fairly significant. But I think the thing that I would say that I learned through it, or I'm learning through it, was just that, and depending on God, he fulfills and supplies all our need. So there's a couple of verses that the team hear me say a lot, which are, I can do nothing in my own strength, which is from John 15, without me you can do nothing. And the other expression, which is, I can do all things through Christ. And it's like, both are true. Both are, like, in the Bible, there's clear scriptural emphases, and yet both are true. So it's like, I can't do this. So like, the volume of work, I remember the emails count went, like, I was getting 150 emails a day some days in that April-May period. And it was just like, whoa, this is intense. And yet being able to fulfill it. Good teamwork, I think, was essential through all that period. People sort of sharing in the load of what had to be done. We were in the middle, or the second year of our 5-year plan, and in year 2 of that plan, sorry, we were end of the first year, starting the second, and we were pioneering 3 new services, and it was right on the cusp of lockdown being announced, but we were too far into them to stop them because the staff were appointed and all the rest of it. So I found that quite exciting, that even though there was all this restriction, because it was essential work, and because we were allowed to do it, we were able to start these new services and reach more people. But yeah, it's been, I mean, personally for me, it's been like, I would say, I missed the gathered church. I missed that a lot. I missed the gathered church. To, like, online's okay up to a point, but looking forward to singing God's praise with others, for example, and the strength that are drawn through the means of grace that are slightly more limited at the moment. Mm-hmm. Having said that, God meets us. I was on a Zoom call the other day praying together. I'll finish with this, Andy, sorry, but praying together with the managers, thinking, I just knew the nearness of God, and I thought, oh, that's wonderful. And in that moment in the prayer, I realized, even though we were in 25 different places, each of us, this was the management team, everyone was involved in that moment. And many people afterwards were like, oh, the Lord really drew near. And the distance doesn't matter to the Almighty, because he's present with us in all circumstances.
That's great, guys. So just thinking about the future, what, or hopefully moving out of lockdown, what is your vision for your organisations as we come out of lockdown? What do you want to keep? What would you like to get back to? What are some of the things that have been positive during lockdown that you're going to continue with? What's your kind of vision for the future for your respective organisations? Kat, do you want to go first?
I mean, the vision for our organisation is to keep loving the one in front of us abundantly, and to grow as a result of doing that really well, and to serve more families and partner with more churches because of that. I'm excited to get more people back face to face with families. Like, while similarly we kind of fell into essential work, we're also, because we're working through volunteers, it was that constant tension of making sure support was face to face where it was critical, but drawing a line as to what was critical, what was beneficial, and what they'd be okay, and we could hold them virtually. But we've all known that face to face is better. So, you know, we've got some family support managers who are supporting families they've never met face to face, and they are desperate to get back out there. So really excited to have that, you know, more physical experience with people and alongside families. I think one of the things we'll keep, and one of the real joys is that actually as an organisation across the country, or across the 4 nations, is that we have felt more connected as a whole organisation, because we can, just like the prayer meeting you're describing, we're able to meet without the expense of pulling people together, and people have felt more connected in a way that is a real treasure. And so I want to maintain that, and the ease by which, like, we had our first ever kind of volunteer church staff vision night, just pulling together 200 or 300 people on a 40-minute long Zoom call, to share vision and impassion and And that was amazing. And so excited about the ease with which you can do some of those things as well into the future. That much as I'm sure there are lots of things that we don't want to do on Zoom, there are some things that we would never have thought to do that actually make us stronger and richer and more connected.
We had a great international night as well, didn't we, with our friends in America and Canada?
Yeah.
We had a prayer night with three countries. It was amazing.
Yeah.
What about yourself, Alasdair? What's your kind of vision for the future?
Well, I'm encouraged that so much has been possible in that last 12 months. So that actually gives confidence in a good way, not in a sort of brash way. Quiet confidence of what can be achieved even in those 12 months. As we go into next year, there'll be, we hope, less restrictions. We're kind of got our eye on the 26th of April in Scotland for a move into a slightly different framework for a time. So we will be, God willing, seeking to pioneer 3 more services this year. We've developed more work in the north of Scotland, Andy. Just this last year, we're just developing it, which I know you'd be interested in. So we've got recovery worker just starting on Monday coming in Inverness, a recovery worker in Aberdeen, family worker in Aberdeen, and a coordinator in Aberdeen with the existing drop-in coordinator, Cam, who's already in post. So we're encouraged by that. We've appointed someone, a pioneer coordinator is the job description.
Wow.
For somebody in Perth, which we're excited by. And also we're developing the opportunity for housing in Aberdeen as well. So those are actually the projects that are due to start by March, as in 15 days time. So we're on track for them, but there's another round for next year. So I'm excited by that. The board are all on side with that. We're not going to keep on doing that forever. That's the 5-year plan, and then we'll review what we're up to. One of the things that, that is at the back of that is making sure that these things are sustainable and that we sustain all the other things that are going on. So I would like, going into next year, to keep on building good networks, keep on building good partnerships. We partner with about 25 charities just now. So keep on building those. We see ourselves as an arm of the church. I'd like to, but the leadership changes in churches, especially at the national level. So I want to link up with some of the national leads. And we've got developing work in the West, in Glasgow, and partner well with a number of charities there, but we'd like to develop that too. I would love to have a big day out, get the teams together, whether it's 2 days or one big day. I'm a fan of hugs, so maybe you and I, Andy, could have a hug at some point this year. So I think getting folk together will be a blessing to people. We might, there'll be certain things we'll bring forward, like Zoom calls might be a feature of gathered prayer times for the future, but then people are tired of it too. So we'll see. I think one of the bigger questions for us is, because most of our staff are in the workplace, predominantly key workers, but for those that have been working from home for the last 12 months on and off with some respite, one of the questions is, what will that look like in year 1 after lockdown? What will it look like in year 3 after lockdown? Because it could be very different. And I imagine it might be blended to start with.
Good. So just to finish off with, guys, we always ask our guests on Ragged Theology podcast just for a favourite book or Bible passage, just to share with folks. So have you got a book that's really impacted you, or a Bible passage, or something that you'd want to leave us with? Kat, do you want to go first?
Sure, I've got mine here. So Brené Brown, Dare to Lead. For me, so much rich stuff about leading through vulnerability, being able to have those conversations that she talks about, rumbling, but those kind of tricky conversations about digging into your values. Yeah, I think so much of her stuff has really inspired me as a leader, and I think this, of all her books, that is the one that I would recommend, and that has empowered me to lead differently.
You'd recommend some Patrick Lencioni stuff as well, would you?
Absolutely. He'd be next on my list after Brené Brown.
Good.
Yeah.
What about you, Ali?
Well, it's Fresh Manna, the psalm that has been resonating in my heart recently. Psalm 28. There's lots of other famous scriptures I could pick out, but this is just very fresh. One part's personal and the other part's more for thinking about the body. Praise be to the Lord, for he's heard my cry for mercy. The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him and he helps me. And it was just the simplicity of that verse. My heart trusts in him and he helps me, because we're children, we're children of God, and it's like we're children in our thinking, and we're grown-ups and we're adults, but we're also like just, navigating life. And it's just, I love that verse. My heart trusts in him and he helps me. My heart leaps for joy, and with my song I praise him. So that's the personal bit. And then verse 8 and 9 of the same psalm, this was really for me that resonated, thinking really about Bethany as a whole, as a people in God's hands, an arm of the church, part of the wider body as well. The Lord is the strength of his people, a fortress of salvation for his anointed one. Save your people, bless your inheritance, and be their shepherd. Carry them forever. So it's there's a text in the Old Testament in Deuteronomy about Benjamin being carried on the Lord's shoulders. But this was like the people of God being carried by the Lord. And I just love that picture. And it gives me confidence, like going into this, I'm thinking of the coming year from April forwards in terms of the cycle, but it gives me confidence that God has this and God has his people.
That's really strange. I read Psalm 28 this morning.
Oh, there you go.
Incredible.
Nice.
Great. Well, it's been a inspirational discussion, guys. Thank you so much. A lot of food for thought around leadership. So you've both inspired me in my leadership journey. So thank you for that. And for those who are watching the podcast, please pray for Kat and Ali, and for Safe Families, and for Bethany Christian Trust. Both organisations have had a huge impact over the last few years on thousands of people. I'm just writing an article just now for Safe Families, and I asked Stuart, our IT guy, for what we'd achieved in lockdown, and I was just blown away by the statistics of connecting about 100 families a month to community, and hosted 119 different children, and the number of bed nights, and I'm sure Ali's got similar statistics of what you've achieved in lockdown, and it's just been remarkable what both of the organisations have done by the grace of God, and with great inspirational leadership. So thank you for all that you do and for all that you are to your staff, and those of us who've experienced not such great leadership are very thankful for good leadership, and just keep on doing what you're doing. So thanks for joining us on Ragged Theology Podcast.
Thank you, Andy and Kat. Yeah, lovely to catch up with you both. And thanks for the opportunity.